In the shadowed halls of Thornfield Grange, a scream pierces the night, and a man lies dead, struck down by a bronze statuette. Who among the elegant guests hides a deadly secret? Was it the heiress with a hidden past, the blustering major, or the quiet doctor with a claim to the estate? As lies unravel and clues multiply, a lost glove, a rose petal, a cryptic note, and Miss Jane Marple unravel a web of greed and betrayal. Can you guess the killer before the final twist? Chapter 1: The Gathering at Thornfield Grange. In the quiet hamlet of St. Mary's Hollow, nestled deep in the English countryside, Thornfield Grange stood as a monument to faded grandeur. Its ivy-clad walls, weathered by time, rose imposingly against the soft September light of 1932. The estate, owned by the wealthy but reclusive Sir Reginald Ashby, was a labyrinth of oak-paneled rooms, creaking staircases, and shadowed corridors that whispered of secrets long buried. On this particular evening, the Grange buzzed with an unusual energy, for Sir Reginald had invited a select group of guests to dine, a rare occurrence for a man known to shun society. The dining room, aglow with candlelight, was a study in opulence. A long mahogany table gleamed under the weight of silver cutlery and crystal glassware, while a fire crackled in the immense hearth, casting flickering shadows across the faces of the assembled company. At the head of the table sat Sir Reginald, a gaunt man of 60 with piercing gray eyes and a manner that suggested he tolerated rather than welcomed his guests. To his right was his niece, Clara Ashby, a vivacious young woman of 25 whose auburn curls and quick laughter seemed at odds with the somber atmosphere. Opposite her sat Major Ernest Whitlock, a retired military man with a bristling mustache and a penchant for recounting tales of his campaigns in India. Beside him was Mrs. Lavinia Gray, a widow of indeterminate age whose sharp tongue and sharper wit made her a formidable presence. Dr. Philip Hawthorne, the village physician, sat quietly, his scholarly demeanor betrayed by the nervous drumming of his fingers. Lastly, there was Miss Beatrice Lyle, Sir Reginald's private secretary, a mousy woman whose spectacles and demure dress did little to conceal her watchful eyes. The conversation, though polite, was strained. Sir Reginald had announced earlier that evening his intention to revise his will, a decision that hung over the table like a storm cloud. Clara, ever the optimist, attempted to lighten the mood with talk of the upcoming harvest festival, but her efforts were met with distracted murmurs. Major Whitlock, emboldened by the claret, began a loud discourse on the decline of British manners, while Mrs. Gray's barbed retorts kept the room on edge. Dr. Hawthorne excused himself briefly to attend to a patient in the village, promising to return before dessert. Miss Lyle, meanwhile, scribbled notes in a small leather-bound book, her pen moving with the precision of a metronome. As the clock in the hall struck 9, a piercing scream shattered the fragile civility. The guests froze, their eyes darting toward the sound, which seemed to emanate from the library. Sir Reginald rose, his face pale but composed, and led the way, his guests trailing behind like reluctant shadows. The library door stood ajar, and within, sprawled across the Persian rug, lay the body of Mr. Victor Crane, Sir Reginald's solicitor. His lifeless eyes stared at the ceiling, a thin trickle of blood seeping from a wound at his temple. A heavy bronze statuette, one of a pair depicting Greek muses, lay beside him, its base stained crimson. Clara gasped, clutching Major Whitlock's arm, while Mrs. Gray's lips tightened into a thin line. Miss Lyle's pen ceased its scratching, her face unreadable. Dr. Hawthorne, who had just returned through the front door, hurried to the body, his medical instincts overriding his shock. "He's dead," he pronounced after a moment, his voice steady but strained. "Blunt force trauma." It happened within the last half hour. Who could have done this? Clara whispered, her eyes wide with horror. Sir Reginald's gaze swept the room, cold and calculating. No one leaves this house, he said quietly. Not until we know the truth. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, each aware that the murderer was likely among them. The air grew thick with suspicion, and the shadows cast by the fire seemed to dance with menace. In the village of St. Mary's Hollow, word of the murder spread swiftly, carried by the night wind to the modest cottage of Miss Jane Marple. The elderly spinster, known for her sharp mind and unassuming demeanor, was no stranger to the darker currents that ran beneath the surface of a village life. She sat by her hearth, knitting a pale blue shawl, when a knock at the door announced the arrival of Inspector Davies, a harried young man whose respect for Miss Marple's insight had grown with each case they'd shared. "Miss Marple," he said, removing his hat, "there's been a murder at Thornfield Grange. Sir Reginald Ashby's solicitor, Victor Crane, was found dead in the library. I'd value your thoughts if you'd be so kind as to come." Miss Marple's needles paused, her bright eyes meeting his. "A murder, you say? How very curious." She set her knitting aside and rose, her movement sprightly despite her years. "I shall need my shawl and my notebook. Tell me, Inspector, who was present when the body was discovered?" As they walked toward the Grange, Inspector Davies recounted the evening's events, detailing the guests and the scream that had drawn them to the library. Miss Marple listened intently, her mind already sifting through the fragments of the story like a gardener tending to her roses. Thornfield Grange loomed ahead, its windows glowing like watchful eyes. Miss Marple adjusted her shawl and stepped into the night, ready to unravel the secrets hidden within its walls. Chapter 2. The Scene of the Crime. The library at Thornfield Grange was a cavernous room, its walls lined with leather-bound volumes that seemed to absorb the flickering light of the candelabra. The air was heavy with the scent of old paper and polished wood, now tainted by the metallic tang of blood. Victor Crane's body remained where it had fallen, sprawled across the Persian rug, his lifeless hand still clutching a crumpled piece of paper. The bronze statuette, its base stained with crimson, lay accusingly nearby, a silent witness to the violence that had shattered the evening's calm. Miss Jane Marple stood just inside the threshold, her small figure dwarfed by the grandeur of the room. Her eyes, bright and bird-like, darted from the body to the surrounding details, taking in the scene with the precision of a watchmaker. Inspector Davies hovered at her side, his notebook open, though his pencil remained idle as he awaited her observations. The guests, barred from leaving the Grange, had been ushered to the drawing-room, their murmurs of unease audible through the closed door. "A most distressing affair," Miss Marple murmured, her voice soft but clear. She stepped carefully around the body, her sensible shoes making no sound on the rug. "Inspector, have you noted the position of the statuette? It is one of a pair, I see." She gestured toward a second bronze muse, identical to the first, standing undisturbed on a nearby table. Davies nodded, jotting down the observation. "Yes, Miss Marple. The other one hasn't been touched, far as we can tell. The murder weapon was likely picked up on impulse, don't you think?" "Perhaps," she replied, her tone noncommittal. She knelt, her joints protesting only slightly, to examine the crumpled paper in Crane's hand. With a delicate touch, she eased it free, revealing a half-torn sheet of legal stationery. The words were scrawled in a hurried hand. "Reginald, you must reconsider. Danger lies in—" The sentence ended abruptly, as though the writer had been interrupted. Miss Marple's lips pursed. "This is most suggestive, Inspector. Mr. Crane, it seems, had something urgent to communicate. But to whom and about what?" She handed the paper to Davies, who bagged it carefully for evidence. Her gaze shifted to the room itself. The library's tall windows overlooked the darkened gardens, their heavy velvet curtains drawn back to reveal the night beyond. One window was slightly ajar, admitting a faint breeze that stirred the papers on a nearby desk. A crystal decanter of brandy sat on a sideboard, its stopper missing, and a single glass stood beside it, half filled. Miss Marple noted the absence of fingerprints on the glass, though the decanter bore smudges that suggested recent handling. "The timing is curious," she remarked, glancing at the grandfather clock in the corner, its hands pointing to 9:15. Dr. Hawthorne said the death occurred within the last half hour before his examination at 9. That places the murder between 8:30 and 9 o'clock, just as dinner was in full swing. Davies scratched his head. "But everyone was in the dining room when the scream was heard, Miss Marple, except Dr. Hawthorne, who'd stepped out to see a patient. We've got their statements. None of them left the table until the scream." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. "Statements, Inspector, are like village gossip, useful but not always reliable. Let us speak with the guests. I am most interested in what they choose to say and what they choose to omit." They crossed to the drawing room, where the assembled company awaited, their faces a tableau of anxiety and suspicion. Sir Reginald stood by the fireplace, his expression one of icy control, though his fingers gripped the mantel tightly. Clara Ashby sat on a velvet settee, twisting a handkerchief in her hands, her earlier vivacity replaced by a pallor that made her freckles stand out starkly. Major Whitlock paced near the window, muttering about damn cowards who strike in the dark. Mrs. Lavinia Gray occupied an armchair, her posture rigid, her eyes darting to each speaker as though weighing their words. Dr. Hawthorne leaned against a bookcase, his scholarly calm fraying at the edges, while Miss Beatrice Lyle sat apart, her notebook closed but her fingers twitching as though eager to write. Miss Marple took a seat, her small frame somehow commanding the room's attention. "Good evening," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "A tragedy has occurred, and I am here to assist Inspector Davies in uncovering the truth. I should like each of you to recount your movements between 8 and 9 o'clock this evening. Precision, if you please." Sir Reginald spoke first, his tone clipped. "I was in the dining room presiding over dinner. I did not leave the table until the scream, which I believe was Clara's." Clara nodded, her voice trembling. "I screamed when I saw Mr. Crane. I was in the dining room all evening except for a moment when I stepped into the hall to fetch my shawl. It was just after 8:30, I think." Major Whitlock snorted. "I was at the table, eating that overcooked pheasant. Didn't budge until we all rushed to the library. Damned waste of a good meal." Mrs. Gray's smile was thin. "I, too, remained at the table, though I found the conversation rather less engaging than the claret. I noticed nothing unusual until the scream." Dr. Hawthorne cleared his throat. "I was called away at 8:15 to tend to Mrs. Jenkins in the village. Her asthma, you know. I returned just before 9 and joined the others in the library." Miss Lyle's voice was barely audible. "I was in the dining room taking notes for Sir Reginald. I stepped out briefly at 8:40 to fetch a fresh pen from the library, but I saw nothing amiss." Miss Marple's gaze lingered on each speaker, her expression unreadable. "Thank you," she said at last. "Inspector, might we examine the hall and the servants' quarters? I am curious about the scream and who else might have been near the library." As they left the drawing room, Miss Marple paused by a small table in the hall, where a silver tray held a single glove, black, leather, and unmistakably masculine. "How curious," she murmured, her fingers brushing the glove's edge. "It seems someone was careless, or perhaps deliberate." The night deepened around Thornfield Grange, and with it, the web of secrets grew ever more tangled. Chapter 3. The Belgian Detective Arrives. The morning after the murder at Thornfield Grange dawned gray and heavy, with a mist that clung to the estate's sprawling lawns like a shroud. The air inside the Grange was no less oppressive as the guests, confined to the house by Inspector Davies's orders, moved restlessly through its halls, their faces etched with suspicion and fatigue. The servants, too, whispered in corners, their usual efficiency disrupted by the shadow of violence. It was into this tense atmosphere that an unexpected visitor arrived, announced by the sharp ring of the doorbell at precisely 10 o'clock. Miss Jane Marple, who had returned to the Grange at the inspector's request, was in the morning room examining a timetable of the previous evening's events she had meticulously compiled. Her small, neat handwriting listed each guest's stated movements, cross-referenced with the servant's observations. She looked up as the butler, a stooped man named Parsons, ushered in a diminutive figure whose presence seemed to command the room despite his modest stature. "Monsieur Hercule Poirot," Parsons announced, his voice betraying a hint of awe. Poirot, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his mustache waxed to perfection, stepped forward with a slight bow. His bright green-gray eyes surveyed the room, taking in every detail with the precision of a jeweler inspecting a gem. "Bonjour, mademoiselle," he said, addressing Miss Marple with a courteous nod. "And Inspector Davies, I presume. I am Hercule Poirot, summoned by Sir Reginald Ashby himself, who, I understand, finds himself in a most distressing predicament." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled with interest. "Monsieur Poirot, how delightful to meet you. I have heard of your remarkable methods. I am but a humble observer, assisting where I can." Poirot's smile was polite but guarded. "Your reputation for observation, mademoiselle, precedes you. I suspect we shall find much to discuss." He turned to Inspector Davies, who looked both relieved and slightly intimidated by the detective's arrival. "Now, Inspector, pray tell me the facts of this unfortunate affair." Davies recounted the events of the previous evening, the dinner, the scream, the discovery of Victor Crane's body, and the initial statements of the guests. Poirot listened intently, his fingers steepled, his head tilted slightly as though hearing a symphony only he could discern. When Davies mentioned the crumpled note found in Crane's hand, Poirot's eyes narrowed. "This note. May I see it?" Davies produced the evidence bag, and Poirot examined the torn paper through the plastic, his lips pursing. "Reginald, you must reconsider. Danger lies in—" "Most intriguing. The words suggest urgency, perhaps a warning. But of what? And why was it not completed?" Miss Marple, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "It is curious, Monsieur Poirot, that the note was found in Mr. Crane's hand, yet no pen was found near the body. The library desk had an inkwell, but it was dry, and the pen beside it was capped." Poirot's eyes gleamed with approval. "An excellent observation, mademoiselle. The absence of the pen is as telling as its presence might have been. Perhaps Mr. Crane was interrupted before he could finish writing, or perhaps the note was placed in his hand after the fact." Davies frowned. "You think someone staged it?" Poirot waved a hand dismissively. "I think nothing yet, Inspector. I observe, I reflect, I arrange the little gray cells in order. Let us visit the scene of the crime." The trio proceeded to the library where the body had been removed, but the room remained untouched, preserved for investigation. Poirot moved with deliberate care, his polished shoes silent on the rug. He paused by the bronze statuette, still in its place on the floor, and examined its twin on the table. "These muses," he said softly. "They are heavy, no? A weapon of opportunity, perhaps, but chosen with intent. The killer was close to the victim, close enough to strike with force." He turned to the window, still slightly ajar, and ran a finger along the sill. "No signs of forced entry, yet the breeze suggests access. Tell me, Inspector, have the gardens been searched?" "Not yet, sir," Davies admitted. We've been focused on the house. Then we shall remedy that, Poirot declared. But first, I wish to speak with the guests. Their alibis, their motives, these are the threads we must weave into a pattern. In the drawing room, the guests awaited, their nerves frayed by a sleepless night. Sir Reginald greeted Poirot with a curt nod, his earlier composure strained. Monsieur Poirot, I trust you'll resolve this quickly. Crane was my solicitor, a trusted confidant. His death is a blow to us all. Poirot inclined his head. I shall do my utmost, Sir Reginald, but I require candor from all present. Tell me, what was the purpose of Mr. Crane's visit? Sir Reginald hesitated, his fingers tightening on his cane. He was here to discuss my will. I intended to make changes, significant ones. Clara Ashby, seated nearby, flinched, her handkerchief twisting tighter. Major Whitlock muttered something about family greed, while Mrs. Gray's eyes narrowed, her silence more eloquent than words. Dr. Hawthorne adjusted his glasses nervously, and Miss Lyle's pen, once again in hand, scratched furiously. Poirot's gaze swept the room, lingering on each face. And who among you spoke with Mr. Crane alone last evening? A heavy silence followed, broken only by the ticking of the clock. Finally, Miss Lyle spoke, her voice low. I saw him in the library at 8:20 briefly. He seemed agitated, but he said it was nothing. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Merci, mademoiselle. Every detail, however small, brings us closer to the truth. As he turned to leave, Miss Marple caught his eye, her expression one of quiet understanding. Monsieur Poirot, she said softly, I believe the glove in the hall may interest you. It is out of place, like a note without a pen. Poirot's mustache twitched. You are most perceptive, mademoiselle. Let us see what other secrets this house holds. Outside, the mist began to lift, but within Thornfield Grange, the fog of deceit grew ever thicker. Chapter 4. The Questions Begin. The drawing room at Thornfield Grange, with its high ceilings and heavy brocade curtains, seemed to close in on its occupants as Hercule Poirot began his inquiries. The morning light filtered weakly through the mist outside, casting a pallor over the faces of the assembled guests. Each sat stiffly, aware that the diminutive Belgian detective, with his piercing eyes and meticulous manner, was not a man to be underestimated. Miss Jane Marple sat quietly in a corner, her knitting needles clicking softly, her presence almost forgotten, yet her gaze missing nothing. Inspector Davies stood by the door, his notebook at the ready as Poirot paced slowly before the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back. Mesdames, messieurs, Poirot began, his voice calm but commanding. A man is dead, struck down in this very house. To find the truth, I must understand not only what was done, but why. Each of you, I am certain, has a story to tell. Let us begin with the events of last evening, from 8 o'clock until the scream at 9. I ask for precision, for it is in the details that the truth hides. Sir Reginald Ashby, seated at the head of the room, spoke first, his voice steady but laced with irritation. As I said, Monsieur Poirot, I was in the dining room, hosting my guests. I had no cause to leave the table. Crane was alive when dinner began, and I heard nothing until Clara's scream. Poirot's eyes flickered to Clara Ashby, who sat twisting her handkerchief, her auburn curls slightly disheveled. Mademoiselle Clara, you mentioned fetching your shawl from the hall at 8:30. Did you see anyone near the library during this time? Clara's cheeks flushed. No, Monsieur Poirot. The hall was empty. I was only gone a moment, perhaps 2 minutes. I heard voices from the dining room, but nothing else. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. And you, Major Whitlock? Your account, if you please. The Major bristled, his mustache quivering. I was at the table as I told the inspector, eating, drinking, listening to that tedious chatter about the harvest festival. I've no patience for skulking about libraries, and I certainly didn't see Crane after we sat down to dine." Mrs. Lavinia Gray, her posture as rigid as her tone, interjected before Poirot could move on. "I, too, remained at the table, Monsieur Poirot, though I confess I found the conversation rather lacking in substance. I noticed Mr. Crane seemed distracted during dinner, but I thought little of it at the time." Poirot's gaze lingered on her. "Distracted, you say? In what way, madame?" Mrs. Gray's lips tightened. He kept glancing at his watch and fidgeting with his napkin. I assumed he was eager to return to his papers in the library. Dr. Philip Hawthorne cleared his throat, his scholarly air marred by a nervous tic in his jaw. "As I've said, I left the Grange at 8:15 to visit Mrs. Jenkins in the village. Her asthma flared up and I was there until just before 9. I returned to find everyone in the library, with poor Crane dead." Poirot tilted his head. "A most convenient absence, doctor. And how long does it take to walk to the village and back?" Hawthorne hesitated. 15 minutes each way, perhaps a bit less. I was with Mrs. Jenkins for about half an hour, which leaves perhaps a small window unaccounted for," Poirot mused, his tone light but probing. He turned to Miss Beatrice Lyle, whose spectacles glinted as she met his gaze. "Mademoiselle Lyle, you mentioned visiting the library at 8:40 to fetch a pen. Did you speak with Mr. Crane?" Miss Lyle's hands clasped her notebook tightly. "Only briefly. He was at the desk, writing something. He seemed agitated, as I said. I took my pen and returned to the dining room. It was no more than a minute." Poirot's mustache twitched. "And yet, mademoiselle, the pen on the desk was capped and the inkwell dry. Curious, no?" Miss Lyle's cheeks paled, but she said nothing. Poirot let the silence hang, his eyes moving from one guest to another. "There is a contradiction here," he said at last. "Each of you claims to have been in the dining room or elsewhere, yet Mr. Crane was struck down in the library between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. Someone, perhaps, is not entirely truthful." A murmur of protest rippled through the room, but Poirot raised a hand. "I do not accuse, yet. I merely observe. Now, let us consider the servants. Inspector, have they been questioned?" Davies nodded. "Yes, sir. The butler, Parsons, was in the pantry polishing silver. The cook and housemaid were in the kitchen preparing dessert. The footman, James, was serving in the dining room. All claim they heard nothing until the scream." Miss Marple's needles paused, and she spoke softly, as though to herself. "The footman, James, is a young man, is he not? I noticed him lingering near the hall table earlier, where that glove was found." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Merci, mademoiselle. You remind me of the glove, black, leather, masculine. It is, perhaps, a clue that does not belong. Inspector, let us speak with this James." The footman, a lanky youth with a nervous demeanor, was summoned. He stood twisting his cap, his eyes darting between Poirot and Davies. "I was in the dining room, sir," he said quickly, "serving the wine, clearing plates. I didn't go near the library." "And the glove in the hall?" Poirot asked, his voice deceptively mild. "It is yours, perhaps?" James flushed. "No, sir, I don't own gloves like that. I did notice it on the table earlier, when I passed through the hall at about 8:45. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Most interesting. You may go, James, but remain in the house." As the footman retreated, Poirot turned to Miss Marple. "Mademoiselle, your eye for detail is formidable. The glove, the note, the dry inkwell, these are pieces of a puzzle, but the picture, it is not yet clear." Miss Marple inclined her head. "In my village, Monsieur Poirot, I have learned that the smallest things, a glance, a forgotten item, often tell the loudest stories." Poirot nodded, his mind already arranging the facts in his little gray cells. The guests watched him warily, each aware that the net of suspicion was tightening. Outside, the mist had lifted, but within Thornfield Grange, the truth remained shrouded in shadow. Chapter 5. The Red Herrings. The afternoon light filtered through the heavy drapes of Thornfield Grange, casting long shadows across the drawing room where the guests remained, their unease palpable. Hercule Poirot stood by the window, his silhouette sharp against the muted glow, his fingers tapping lightly against his polished cane. Miss Jane Marple sat nearby, her knitting a steady rhythm in the tense silence, her eyes flicking from one guest to another as though reading an unwritten script. Inspector Davies, stationed near the door, flipped through his notebook, his brow furrowed as he reviewed the conflicting alibis. The investigation had taken a turn, for the police had uncovered a piece of evidence that seemed to point accusingly at one of the guests. Davies cleared his throat, addressing the room. "We've found something in the library," he announced, holding up a small, monogrammed handkerchief, its delicate lace edge stained with a faint smear of blood. "It bears the initials C.A. Clara Ashby." Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "That's impossible. I haven't been near the library, not since before dinner. I lost that handkerchief days ago." The room erupted in murmurs. Major Whitlock's eyes narrowed, and he muttered, "Convenient, losing it just in time for a murder." Mrs. Lavinia Gray's lips curled into a faint, mocking smile, while Dr. Hawthorne shifted uncomfortably, his fingers adjusting his glasses. Miss Beatrice Lyle's pen paused mid-scratch, her gaze fixed on Clara with an intensity that belied her usual timidity. Poirot raised a hand for silence, his expression calm but piercing. "Mademoiselle Clara, you say you lost this handkerchief. When, precisely, and where?" Clara's voice trembled. "I don't know exactly. Perhaps Monday. In the garden. I was reading there, and when I returned to the house, it was gone. I thought it might have fallen among the roses." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The garden, you say? Most interesting. Inspector, has the garden been searched?" Davies shook his head. "Not yet, Monsieur Poirot. We've been focused on the house, but I'll send a constable to look." "Bien," Poirot said, turning to the group. "This handkerchief, it is what you English call a red herring, non? It appears to accuse, but it may mislead. Let us consider other possibilities before we rush to judgment." The guests exchanged uneasy glances, each aware that suspicion could shift as quickly as the wind. Poirot's gaze settled on Major Whitlock, whose bluster seemed to mask a growing unease. "Major, you spoke of being at the table all evening, yet the footman, James, mentioned you requested a fresh glass of claret at 8:35. Did you not step into the hall to speak with him?" Whitlock's face reddened. "I may have done for a moment. The boy was slow with the wine, but I was back at the table in no time. Ask anyone." Mrs. Gray arched an eyebrow. "I recall you were absent for a minute or two, Major. You returned just as we were discussing the harvest festival." Poirot nodded, his mustache twitching slightly. "And you, Madame Gray, you observed Mr. Crane's distraction at dinner. Did you notice anything else? Perhaps a glance, a gesture, that struck you as unusual?" Mrs. Gray hesitated, her sharp eyes narrowing. "I saw him pass a note to Miss Lyle during the first course. It was discreet, but I have a keen eye for such things." Miss Lyle's head snapped up, her cheeks flushing. "It was nothing of importance," she said quickly. "Just a reminder about a document he needed for Sir Reginald." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "And yet, mademoiselle, you did not mention this note before. Why?" Miss Lyle's fingers tightened around her notebook. "I forgot. It was a trivial matter." "Trivial matters," Poirot said softly, "are often the key to great crimes." He turned to Dr. Hawthorne, whose nervous demeanor had not escaped his notice. "Doctor, Your visit to Mrs. Jenkins is most convenient for your alibi, yet you return to the Grange just before the scream. Did you enter through the front door or perhaps another entrance? Hawthorne's Adam's apple bobbed. The front door, of course. Parsons let me in. I went straight to the library when I heard the commotion. Poirot nodded, filing the information away. He turned to Sir Reginald, whose icy composure had begun to crack. Sir Reginald, you mentioned revising your will. Did Mr. Crane discuss these changes with anyone else in the house? Sir Reginald's jaw tightened. Not to my knowledge. He was discreet, as a solicitor should be, but I made no secret of my intentions at dinner. Perhaps that was unwise. Miss Marple, who had been silent, spoke up, her voice gentle but pointed. Monsieur Poirot, I find it curious that the library window was ajar, yet no one mentioned opening it. In my village, an open window often means someone wished to come or go unnoticed. Poirot's eyes twinkled with approval. Précisément, mademoiselle. The window, the handkerchief, the glove, these are threads in a tapestry of deception. But who is the weaver? He addressed the group once more. I urge you to reflect, mes amis. The truth is like a delicate mechanism. It requires all parts to function. If you conceal even one cog, the machine will fail. As the guests dispersed, their alibis now muddied by doubt, Poirot conferred quietly with Miss Marple and Davies. The handkerchief, he said, is too obvious, too neatly placed. Someone wishes us to suspect Mademoiselle Clara. But why? And the note to Miss Lyle, another piece of the puzzle that does not fit. Miss Marple nodded, her needles resuming their rhythm. In my experience, Monsieur Poirot, the loudest clues are often the least truthful. It is the quiet ones, the glove, the window, that whisper the real story. Poirot's smile was genuine. You are a woman of great insight, mademoiselle. Let us follow these whispers and see where they lead. Outside, the constable returned from the garden, empty-handed but for a single rose petal caught in his cuff. Poirot's eyes narrowed, and the wheels of his mind turned ever faster. Chapter 6. A Clue in Detail. The late afternoon sun cast long, slanting rays through the windows of Thornfield Grange, gilding the dust motes that danced in the heavy air. Hercule Poirot stood in the library, his eyes fixed on the spot where Victor Crane's body had lain, though the rug had been cleaned and the bronze statuette returned to its twin on the table. The room, now silent save for the ticking of the grandfather clock, seemed to hold its breath, as though reluctant to yield its secrets. Miss Jane Marple sat nearby, her knitting needles idle for once, her gaze following Poirot's movements with quiet anticipation. Inspector Davies hovered by the door, his notebook filled with increasingly tangled notes. Poirot's attention was drawn to the desk where Crane had been writing before his death. He examined the surface again, noting the capped pen, the dry inkwell, and a faint scratch mark on the polished wood, barely visible but sharp under his fingertip. This mark, he murmured. It is fresh, no? As though something heavy was dragged across the desk. Perhaps the statuette, before it became a weapon. Miss Marple leaned forward, her eyes bright. Or perhaps something else, Monsieur Poirot. A paperweight, a book. Something moved in haste. Poirot nodded, his mustache twitching. Précisément, mademoiselle. The desk tells a story, but it speaks in whispers. He turned to the window, still slightly ajar, and examined the sill more closely. A faint smudge of dirt, no larger than a thumbnail, caught his eye. He scraped it gently with a pocket knife and held it to the light. Earth, from the garden. Someone entered or left this way, despite the alibis that place everyone elsewhere. Davies frowned. But the window's barely open, sir. It's a tight fit for anyone to climb through. Yet not impossible, Poirot replied, his tone thoughtful. The human body, Inspector, is remarkably adaptable when motivated by fear or guilt. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock. Parsons, the butler, entered, his face pale. "Begging your pardon, sir, but I've found something in the servants' quarters. I thought you should see it." He held out a small, folded piece of paper, its edges worn as though handled frequently. Poirot unfolded it with care. The paper was a receipt, dated 2 days prior, for a bottle of laudanum purchased from the village chemist. The buyer's name was not listed, but the chemist's stamp was clear. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Laudanum, a most curious find. Inspector, please confirm with the chemist who made this purchase." Davies nodded, making a note. "Could be a coincidence, sir. Plenty of folks use laudanum for nerves or pain." Poirot's smile was faint. "Coincidence, Inspector, is the refuge of the lazy mind. This receipt, found in the servants' quarters, suggests a connection to the household. We must discover to whom it belongs." Miss Marple's voice was soft, but pointed. "Monsieur Poirot, I recall Mrs. Gray mentioning a headache during dinner. She excused herself briefly to take a powder, did she not? Perhaps it was more than a powder." Poirot's eyes gleamed with approval. "You have the memory of an elephant, mademoiselle. Let us speak with Madame Gray." They found Mrs. Lavinia Gray in the conservatory, surrounded by potted ferns and the faint scent of damp earth. She stood pruning a rosebush with a pair of silver shears, her movements precise, but her expression guarded. "Monsieur Poirot, Miss Marple," she greeted, her voice cool. "Have you come to accuse me of pruning more than roses?" Poirot's smile was disarming. "Not at all, madame. I merely wish to clarify a small detail. You mentioned a headache during dinner and a powder you took. Was this powder, perhaps, laudanum?" Mrs. Gray's shears paused, her eyes narrowing. "I took a simple aspirin, Monsieur Poirot. I have no need for laudanum, nor do I keep it. If you've found such a thing, it belongs to someone else." "And yet," Poirot said, producing the receipt, "this was found in the servants' quarters. Do you know who in this house might have purchased it?" Mrs. Gray's lips tightened. "I do not. But I suggest you ask Dr. Hawthorne. He's the physician, after all. If anyone has access to such things, it would be him." Poirot inclined his head. "Merci, madame. Your suggestion is noted." As they left the conservatory, Miss Marple spoke quietly. She was quick to point to Dr. Hawthorne, Monsieur Poirot. "In my village, such haste often hides a truth of one's own." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. "The laudanum, the scratch on the desk, the smudge of earth, these are not random. They are pieces of a mosaic, mademoiselle. But the pattern, it is still obscured." They returned to the library, where Poirot's attention was drawn to a small, overlooked detail. A single rose petal, wilted and crushed, lodged beneath the edge of the rug near the window. He knelt to retrieve it, holding it to the light. A petal, from the garden, perhaps. The same garden where Mademoiselle Clara lost her handkerchief, and where our killer may have passed. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "In St. Mary's Mead, a petal out of place often tells a story of someone who shouldn't have been there." Poirot's smile was grim. "Then let us find the gardener who left this petal, mademoiselle, for it may lead us to the heart of this crime." As the day waned, the clues multiplied, each one a thread in the intricate web of deception that enveloped Thornfield Grange. Poirot's little gray cells worked tirelessly, arranging and rearranging the facts, while the truth remained just out of reach. Chapter 7. More Lies Surface. The evening shadows lengthened across Thornfield Grange, deepening the gloom that had settled over the estate. The air was thick with unspoken accusations, and the guests, confined to the house, moved like actors in a play they did not fully understand. Hercule Poirot sat in the morning room, a small, elegant space overlooking the gardens, his fingers steepled as he reviewed the clues. The crumpled note, the blood-stained handkerchief, the laudanum receipt, the rose petal, and the mysterious glove. Each was a piece of the puzzle, but the picture remained tantalizingly incomplete. Miss Jane Marple sat opposite, her knitting resumed, though her eyes were sharp, missing nothing. Inspector Davies, ever diligent, awaited Poirot's next move, his notebook now a labyrinth of crossed-out theories. Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock. The footman, James, entered, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly. "Sir, I've remembered something," he stammered. "It might be nothing, but you said to report anything unusual." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Speak, jeune homme. No detail is too small for Hercule Poirot." James swallowed hard. "Last night, just before the scream, I saw Miss Lyle in the hall, near the library door. She was holding something. Looked like a letter, but she tucked it into her sleeve when she saw me. I didn't think much of it then, but—" Poirot's mustache twitched. "Most interesting. Merci, James. You have done well to tell me." As the footman retreated, Miss Marple spoke softly. "A letter, Monsieur Poirot. It reminds me of a case in St. Mary's Mead, where a hidden note revealed a bitter feud. Miss Lyle seems a quiet sort, but quiet waters run deep." Poirot nodded. "Indeed, mademoiselle. Let us speak with Mademoiselle Lyle and see what secrets she hides." They found Miss Beatrice Lyle in the library, seated at the desk, her notebook open but her pen idle. Her spectacles glinted in the lamplight, and her posture stiffened as Poirot and Miss Marple entered. "Monsieur Poirot, Miss Marple," she said, her voice steady but guarded. "Have you more questions?" "Oui, mademoiselle," Poirot said, his tone deceptively mild. "A witness saw you in the hall last night near the library with a letter you concealed. What was this letter, and why did you hide it?" Miss Lyle's fingers tightened on her notebook, her composure faltering. I don't know what you mean. I had no letter." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Mademoiselle, the truth is a delicate flower. It wilts under denial. The footman is certain, and Hercule Poirot does not believe in mistakes. Tell me, what was in this letter?" Miss Lyle hesitated, then sighed, her shoulders slumping. "Very well. It was a note from Mr. Crane, given to me during dinner. He asked me to deliver it to Sir Reginald later that evening, but I never had the chance. After the scream, I panicked and hid it." "And where is this note now?" Poirot pressed. Miss Lyle reached into her sleeve and produced a small, folded paper, its edges creased. Poirot took it, unfolding it carefully. The note read, "Reginald, beware the shadow of greed. Trust no one." Poirot's brow furrowed. This is not the same hand as the note found in Crane's hand, yet both speak of danger. Curious, non? He handed the note to Davies, who bagged it as evidence. Miss Marple's needles paused. 2 notes, both warning Sir Reginald. It suggests Mr. Crane knew something or someone posed a threat. But why not speak openly? Poirot nodded. Précisément. Let us explore another thread. Madame Gray suggested Dr. Hawthorne might have access to laudanum. Let us see what the good doctor reveals. They found Dr. Philip Hawthorne in the conservatory, examining a tray of medical instruments he had brought to treat a minor cut on Clara's hand. His scholarly demeanor was strained, his eyes darting nervously as Poirot approached. "Monsieur Poirot, Miss Marple," he said, setting down a pair of forceps, "I trust you're making progress." "We advance, doctor," Poirot said, his voice smooth. "Tell me, do you prescribe laudanum to your patients? A receipt for it was found in the servants' quarters." Hawthorne's face paled. "Laudanum? I prescribe it occasionally, for severe pain or insomnia, but I haven't given any to anyone in this house. The receipt isn't mine.
And yet, Poirot said, it was purchased 2 days ago from the village chemist. Who in this house might have need of it? Hawthorne hesitated, then spoke reluctantly. Clara, Miss Ashby has been anxious lately. She mentioned sleeplessness. I suggested a mild sedative, but not laudanum. Perhaps she sought it herself. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Or perhaps someone wished it to appear so. Tell me, Doctor, when you returned from the village, did you notice anything unusual in the hall? Perhaps a glove or a rose petal? Hawthorne frowned. A glove? Yes. I saw it on the hall table when I came in. I thought it odd, but I was in a hurry to join the others. No petals, though. Miss Marple spoke softly. In my village, Doctor, a glove out of place often means someone was careless, or wanted to be seen as such. Poirot nodded, his mind racing. The glove, the notes, the laudanum, the petal, these are not random. They are the footprints of a mind that seeks to deceive. But Hercule Poirot is not so easily misled. As they left the conservatory, Poirot turned to Miss Marple. Mademoiselle, the lies multiply, but so do the truths. The letter from Crane to Sir Reginald suggests a motive tied to the will. But whose greed did he fear? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Greed, Monsieur Poirot, is a common thread in human nature. But I wonder if it is greed for money, or something deeper, like revenge. The evening closed in, and with it, the web of deception tightened, each lie revealing a glimpse of the truth that lay hidden at the heart of Thornfield Grange.
Chapter 8. The Emotional Turning Point. The atmosphere at Thornfield Grange had grown stifling, as though the very walls absorbed the weight of suspicion and fear. By the second evening, the guests' nerves were frayed, their polite facades crumbling under the strain of confinement and scrutiny. Hercule Poirot, ever composed, sat in the drawing-room, his sharp eyes observing the subtle shifts in posture and expression among the assembled company. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting needles moving with a steady rhythm, seemed almost a part of the furniture, yet her presence was a quiet anchor in the storm of emotions. Inspector Davies stood by the fireplace, his face etched with frustration as the case grew ever more tangled. Poirot had requested the guest's presence to discuss the latest finding, but his true purpose was to apply pressure, to watch for the crack that would reveal a hidden truth. The room was lit by a single chandelier, its light casting stark shadows across the faces of Sir Reginald Ashby, Clara Ashby, Major Ernest Whitlock, Mrs. Lavinia Gray, Dr. Philip Hawthorne, and Miss Beatrice Lyle. Each sat rigidly, aware that the Belgian detective's questions were no longer mere inquiries, but probes into the heart of their secrets. Monsieur et Mesdames, Poirot began, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel, we have uncovered much: a handkerchief, a glove, 2 notes, a laudanum receipt, a rose petal. Each points to a truth, yet each is shrouded in deception. I ask you now to consider, what did Victor Crane know that cost him his life? Someone in this room holds the key. A heavy silence followed, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Then, unexpectedly, Clara Ashby rose, her face pale, her hands trembling. I can't bear this any longer, she cried, her voice breaking. I didn't kill Mr. Crane, but I know something. I should have spoken sooner. But I was afraid. The room stilled, every eye on Clara. Poirot's gaze was steady, encouraging. Speak, mademoiselle. The truth, it is a burden that grows lighter when shared. Clara took a shaky breath, her eyes glistening. Last week, I overheard Mr. Crane arguing with Uncle Reginald in the study. It was about the will. Mr. Crane said something about a secret heir, someone who might challenge the estate. Uncle was furious, said it would ruin everything. I didn't think much of it then, but now her voice trailed off, and she sank back into her seat, covering her face with her hands. Sir Reginald's face darkened, his knuckles white around his cane. Clara, you had no business eavesdropping. That conversation was private. Poirot raised a hand. Sir Reginald, allow me. Mademoiselle Clara, this secret air, what else did you hear? Clara shook her head. Nothing clear, just that Mr. Crane was worried, said it could cause a scandal. He mentioned a letter, hidden somewhere safe. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A letter, you say? Perhaps the one Mademoiselle Lyle concealed, or the one found in Crane's hand, or another still. He turned to Sir Reginald, his tone deceptively mild. Sir Reginald, who is this heir, and why did it provoke such anger? Sir Reginald's jaw tightened. It's nonsense. Crane was overstepping, meddling in family matters. There is no heir, only rumors he took too seriously. Mrs. Gray's laugh was sharp, cutting through the tension. Rumors, Sir Reginald? In my experience, rumors often have a grain of truth. Perhaps Crane knew something you wish to keep buried. Major Whitlock snorted. Sounds like motive to me. If Crane was stirring up trouble about the will, no wonder someone bashed his head in. Dr. Hawthorne shifted uncomfortably. Let's not jump to conclusions. Crane was a solicitor. He dealt with sensitive matters. It could have been a misunderstanding. Miss Lyle, silent until now, spoke in a low voice. Mr. Crane was meticulous. If he believed there was an heir, he had evidence. He showed me a sealed envelope once, said it was for safekeeping. I don't know where it is now. Poirot's mustache twitched. An envelope, mademoiselle? And you did not think to mention this before? Miss Lyle's cheeks flushed. I thought it unimportant. He never told me what was inside. Miss Marple's needles paused, and she spoke softly. In St. Mary's, Mead, I've seen how a single letter can unravel a family. If this envelope exists, Monsieur Poirot, it may hold the key to Mr. Crane's death. Poirot nodded, his mind racing. The letter, the heir, the will, these are no mere coincidences. Someone in this house feared what Crane knew. But who? He turned to the group, his voice rising slightly. I urge you, if you know of this envelope, speak now, for the longer you conceal it, the closer the noose tightens. The room fell silent again, but the air crackled with unspoken truths. Clara's revelation had shifted the dynamic, exposing a fault line in the group's composure. Poirot's eyes moved from face to face, noting the clenched jaw of Sir Reginald, the averted gaze of Dr. Hawthorne, the calculating stare of Mrs. Gray. Each was hiding something, but Clara's confession had cracked the surface, and Poirot sensed the truth was near. As the guests were dismissed, Poirot conferred with Miss Marple and Davies. The secret heir, he said, it is the heart of this mystery. Crane's death was no random act. It was to silence a truth that threatened someone's future. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes thoughtful. And the laudanum, Monsieur Poirot. It suggests someone was desperate, perhaps to calm their nerves, or to ensure silence in another way. Davies scratched his head. But where's this envelope? We've searched the library and Crane's room. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. The envelope, Inspector, is hidden where no one thinks to look. We must search not only with our eyes, but with our minds. As night fell over Thornfield Grange, the tension within its walls grew palpable, each guest aware that the truth was closing in, ready to shatter the fragile web of lies. Chapter 9. The trap. The third morning at Thornfield Grange dawned with a brittle clarity, the mist finally giving way to a pale sun that did little to warm the chilled atmosphere within the house. The guests, now weary from 2 days of suspicion and confinement, gathered in the drawing room at Hercule Poirot's request, their faces a mixture of dread and defiance. Miss Jane Marple sat in her usual corner, her knitting needles moving with a calm that contrasts sharply with the tension in the room. Inspector Davies stood by the door, his posture alert, sensing that Poirot was preparing to tighten the net around the murderer. Poirot stood before the fireplace, his small frame radiating authority, his mustache impeccably waxed despite the early hour. His green-gray eyes swept over the assembled company. Sir Reginald Ashby, Clara Ashby, Major Ernest Whitlock, Mrs. Lavinia Gray, Dr. Philip Hawthorne, and Miss Beatrice Lyle, each of whom sat rigidly, aware that the Belgian detective was no longer merely probing but setting a trap. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice smooth but laced with purpose, "we stand on the precipice of truth. Victor Crane was murdered to silence a secret tied to a hidden heir and a letter that remains elusive. But Hercule Poirot does not chase shadows. The clues, the handkerchief, the glove, the laudanum receipt, the rose petal, the notes, point to a mind both cunning and desperate. Tonight, we shall uncover the truth." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Let us reconstruct the evening of the murder. Dinner began at 8 o'clock. Between 8:30 and 9 o'clock, Mr. Crane was struck down in the library. Each of you claims an alibi, yet contradictions abound. Mademoiselle Clara, you left to fetch your shawl at 8:30. Major Whitlock, you spoke with the footman at 8:35. Madame Gray, you took a powder for a headache. Mademoiselle Lyle, you fetched a pen at 8:40. Dr. Hawthorne, you returned from the village just before 9 o'clock. And, Sir Reginald, you remained at the table. Yet, the note in Crane's hand was addressed to you. The guests shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting to one another. Poirot continued, his tone sharpening. The handkerchief with Mademoiselle Clara's initials, found near the body, was meant to mislead. The glove in the hall, masculine and out of place, suggests a man's presence or a deliberate deception. The laudanum receipt hints at a motive tied to desperation or deceit, and the rose petal found beneath the rug points to the garden, where someone entered or exited through the library window. Clara's voice trembled. "But I didn't go near the library. Someone must have taken my handkerchief to frame me." Mrs. Gray's smile was thin. "Really, Clara, your protests are tiresome. Perhaps you feared Crane's changes to the will would cut you out." Major Whitlock snorted. "Or maybe it's you, Lavinia, stirring trouble, as usual. You've got a sharp tongue and sharper motives." Poirot raised a hand, silencing the bickering. "Enough. Let us test a theory. Inspector, please bring the glove from the hall." Davies retrieved the black leather glove, and Poirot held it aloft, turning it slowly. "This glove is too large for Mademoiselle Clara or Mademoiselle Lyle, and Madame Gray does not strike me as careless. Major Whitlock, Dr. Hawthorne, Sir Reginald, might it belong to one of you?" The men exchanged glances. Dr. Hawthorne spoke first, his voice unsteady. "Not mine. I don't wear gloves like that." Whitlock shrugged. "Nor mine. Looks expensive. Too fancy for my taste." Sir Reginald's eyes narrowed. "I have no such glove, Monsieur Poirot. This is a distraction." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Is it? Let us try an experiment. Inspector, place the glove on the hall table, exactly as it was found, and observe what happens." Davies did as instructed, and Poirot dismissed the guests, asking them to pass through the hall one by one as they returned to their rooms. He and Miss Marple watched from a discreet alcove, their eyes fixed on the table. Clara passed first, glancing nervously at the glove but not touching it. Mrs. Gray followed, her expression unreadable, her hands clasped firmly behind her. Major Whitlock strode by, his gait heavy, pausing briefly to sneer at the glove. Dr. Hawthorne hesitated, his fingers twitching as though tempted to pick it up, but he moved on. Miss Lyle passed quickly, her eyes averted. Sir Reginald was last, his cane tapping the floor, his gaze lingering on the glove before he continued upstairs. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. Dr. Hawthorne's hesitation, Monsieur Poirot. It was brief, but telling. In my village, such a pause often betrays a guilty conscience. Poirot nodded. Précisément, mademoiselle. The glove is a magnet, drawing out the truth. But there is more. I have asked the chemist to confirm the laudanum purchase. The answer, I suspect, will tighten our trap. As the guests dispersed, Poirot conferred with Davies. The letter about the heir is the key. If we find it, we find the motive. Search Crane's belongings again, Inspector, and look for hidden compartments. The truth is close, but it requires one final push. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. In St. Mary's Mead, I've seen how a single word, spoken in haste, can unravel a lie. Tonight, Monsieur Poirot, someone will speak that word. Poirot's smile was grim. And when they do, mademoiselle, the trap will spring, and the murderer will be revealed. The night settled over Thornfield Grange, the tension as taut as a drawn bow, waiting for the moment of release. Chapter 10. The Reveal. The drawing room at Thornfield Grange was charged with an almost palpable tension as the clock struck 8 on the third evening. The guests, summoned once more by Hercule Poirot, sat in a semicircle, their faces a mixture of apprehension and defiance. The chandelier cast a soft glow, but its light did little to dispel the shadows of suspicion that clung to each occupant. Miss Jane Marple sat quietly to one side, her knitting needle still, her eyes sharp as she observed the unfolding drama. Inspector Davies stood by the door, his notebook clutched tightly, ready to record the culmination of Poirot's meticulous investigation. Poirot stood before the fireplace, his small stature commanding the room with an authority born of intellect. His mustache was immaculate, his eyes gleaming with the certainty of a man who had arranged his little gray cells into a perfect pattern. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice clear and deliberate, "tonight we unmask the murderer of Victor Crane. The clues, the handkerchief, the glove, the laudanum receipt, the rose petal, the notes, have led us through a labyrinth of deception. But Hercule Poirot does not falter. The truth, it is now clear." The guests leaned forward, their breaths held. Poirot's gaze swept over them. Sir Reginald Ashby, his face a mask of cold control. Clara Ashby, her hands twisting her handkerchief. Major Ernest Whitlock, his mustache bristling with indignation. Mrs. Lavinia Gray, her eyes narrowed. Dr. Philip Hawthorne, his scholarly calm fraying. And Miss Beatrice Lyle, her spectacles glinting as she clutched her notebook. "Let us reconstruct," Poirot said, pacing slowly. Victor Crane was killed between 8:30 and 9 o'clock, struck with a bronze statuette in the library. Each of you claimed an alibi, yet contradictions emerged. The handkerchief with Mademoiselle Clara's initials was a clumsy attempt to mislead. The glove in the hall, masculine and out of place, suggested a man or a deception. The laudanum receipt hinted at desperation. The rose petal pointed to the garden. And the notes, one in Crane's hand, one given to Mademoiselle Lyle, spoke of a secret heir and danger. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The key lies in the motive. Crane was revising Sir Reginald's will, a will that threatened to expose a hidden heir. This heir, I deduced, was the spark that ignited murder. But who stood to lose most? Poirot turned to Sir Reginald. "You, monsieur, were furious with Crane for raising this issue. You claimed there was no heir, yet your anger betrayed fear. Why?" Sir Reginald's jaw tightened. "Crane was meddling. There's no heir, only rumors from a distant past." Poirot's smile was faint. Rumors, perhaps, but with evidence. This morning, Inspector Davies found a sealed envelope in Crane's briefcase, hidden in a false bottom. It contained a birth certificate naming a child born to your late sister, Margaret, and given up for adoption. This child, now grown, could claim a share of your estate. Clara gasped. A cousin? But uncle, you never told me, Poirot continued, undeterred. Crane's notes warned of greed and danger. He knew someone feared this heir's claim, but who? Let us examine the alibis. Mademoiselle Clara, your shawl fetching left you briefly unaccounted for. Major Whitlock, your wine request took you to the hall. Madame Gray, your headache powder is curious, given the laudanum receipt. Mademoiselle Lyle, your hidden note suggests complicity. Dr. Hawthorne, your village visit left a window of opportunity. But one detail stood out. The rose petal, found under the rug, matching those in the garden where Clara lost her handkerchief. He turned to Dr. Hawthorne, whose face had paled. Doctor, you returned from the village just before 9 o'clock. You hesitated near the glove in the hall, as though it were familiar. The chemist confirmed you purchased laudanum 2 days ago, claiming it was for a patient, but I suspect it was for yourself, to calm nerves strained by guilt. Hawthorne's voice was hoarse. This is absurd. I was in the village. Poirot's eyes gleamed. No, doctor. You are the heir. The birth certificate names you as Margaret Ashby's son adopted by a Dr. Hawthorne. You came to St. Mary's Hollow to be near the estate, biding your time. Crane discovered your identity and planned to inform Sir Reginald. You could not allow this, for it would ruin your claim, or worse, expose your past. The room was silent, all eyes on Hawthorne. Poirot pressed on. You slipped into the library through the window at 8:45 after your village visit. You confronted Crane, who was writing a warning note. In a moment of panic, you struck him with the statuette. You planted Clara's handkerchief to mislead, and the glove, yours, was left in the hall to suggest another culprit. The laudanum was to steady your nerves, but you could not hide the rose petal caught on your shoe. Hawthorne's hands shook. You have no proof. Poirot produced the birth certificate and the laudanum receipt. The evidence speaks, doctor, and your hesitation at the glove betrayed you. Confess, and spare us further deception. Hawthorne's shoulders slumped, his voice breaking. I didn't mean to kill him. He was going to tell Reginald, ruin everything. I just wanted my share, my birthright. Miss Marple's eyes softened with understanding. In my village, greed often blinds us to reason. You sought justice, doctor, but found only tragedy. Poirot nodded. The trap is sprung. Inspector, take Dr. Hawthorne into custody. As Davies led the broken man away, the room exhaled, the tension dissolving into stunned silence. The truth, so carefully hidden, had been laid bare by Poirot's relentless logic. Chapter 11. The Reflection. The morning after Dr. Philip Hawthorne's confession, Thornfield Grange seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, though the air remained heavy with the aftershocks of betrayal. The guests, no longer confined, moved about with a subdued air, their conversations muted as they grappled with the revelation that the quiet village physician had been both heir and murderer. The drawing room, once a stage for suspicion, was now a place of quiet reckoning. Hercule Poirot stood by the window, his polished cane resting against the sill, his eyes fixed on the gardens where the truth had begun to unravel. Miss Jane Marple sat nearby, her knitting resumed, the soft click of her needles a comforting rhythm in the stillness. Inspector Davies, his notebook finally closed, lingered by the door, his relief tempered by the weight of the case's resolution. Poirot turned to face the room, where Sir Reginald Ashby, Clara Ashby, Major Ernest Whitlock, Mrs. Lavinia Gray, and Miss Beatrice Lyle had gathered one last time at his request. His expression was calm, but his eyes held a depth of understanding that spoke of more than mere deduction. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, his voice soft yet resonant. The tragedy of Victor Crane is resolved, but the lessons it leaves us are profound. Hercule Poirot does not merely solve crimes. He seeks to understand the human heart, for it is there that all crimes begin. Sir Reginald, his face etched with weariness, spoke first. Monsieur Poirot, I owe you my gratitude, but I confess, I'm shaken to learn of Hawthorne's true identity. My sister's son, I never knew. Poirot inclined his head. It is a painful truth, Sir Reginald, but truth is often so. Dr. Hawthorne's greed, born of a sense of entitlement, led him to murder. He believed the estate was his birthright, yet his actions ensured he would never claim it. Clara, her eyes red from tears, spoke softly. I trusted him. He was kind to me, always so gentle. How could I not see it? Miss Marple's needles paused, and she looked at Clara with compassion. My dear, in my village of St. Mary's Mead, I have seen how the kindest faces can hide the darkest secrets. The heart is a complex thing, and even the best of us can be deceived. Poirot nodded, his mustache twitching slightly. Précisément, mademoiselle. The clues, the handkerchief, the glove, the laudanum receipt, the rose petal, the notes, were but reflections of a deeper truth. Dr. Hawthorne wove a web of deception, planting false trails to obscure his guilt. The handkerchief, taken from Mademoiselle Clara's garden, was meant to cast suspicion on her. The glove, his own, was left to suggest another culprit. The laudanum steadied his nerves, and the rose petal betrayed his path through the garden window. But it was his hesitation, his fear of the glove, that revealed him to Poirot. Mrs. Gray, her usual sharpness softened, spoke up. You saw through it all, Monsieur Poirot. I confess I suspected Clara or even Miss Lyle, but I was blind to Hawthorne's motives. Major Whitlock grunted, his bluster subdued. Damn clever, Poirot. I thought it was some outsider, some thief Crane caught in the act. Never pegged the doctor. Miss Lyle, her notebook closed, looked at Poirot with quiet respect. I should have told you about the note sooner. I thought it was harmless, but my silence nearly protected a killer. Poirot's smile was gentle. Do not reproach yourself, mademoiselle. The truth, it finds its way, with or without our help. But it is always better to speak, for silence can be the accomplice of crime. He paced slowly, his voice taking on a reflective tone. The human heart, it is a paradox. Dr. Hawthorne sought justice for his birthright, yet his actions were unjust. He believed he was reclaiming what was his, but in doing so, he lost everything. This is the lesson, mes amis. Greed, when unchecked, destroys not only its object but the soul that pursues it. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes thoughtful. In St. Mary's Mead, I have seen it time and again. A small act, a word, a glance, can set a chain of events in motion. Dr. Hawthorne's tragedy began long before he struck Mr. Crane. It began with a resentment nursed in silence. Poirot turned to Davies. Inspector, you have your man, and the evidence is clear. The birth certificate, the laudanum receipt, the petal, all confirm the story, but I urge you to look beyond the crime, to the why. Only then can justice truly be served. Davies nodded, his respect for Poirot evident. You've done us a great service, sir. I'll see to it the case is closed properly. As the guests began to disperse, Poirot lingered, his gaze returning to the garden. Miss Marple joined him, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders. Monsieur Poirot, she said softly, you have a gift for seeing what others miss. But I wonder, do you ever find these cases leave a mark on you? Poirot's eyes softened, a rare glimpse of vulnerability. Each case, mademoiselle, is a mirror to the human condition. It reminds Poirot that order and method, they are not enough without compassion. But now I must return to London. The world, it does not pause for Hercule Poirot." Miss Marple smiled. "Nor for Jane Marple. But I shall return to my roses in St. Mary's Mead, and perhaps think of you when I see a petal out of place." Poirot bowed, his smile genuine. "Adieu, mademoiselle, until our paths cross again." As he departed Thornfield Grange, the estate seemed to settle into a quiet peace, its secrets laid bare. The truth had been found, but the echoes of the crime would linger, a reminder of the fragile line between justice and vengeance. Chapter 12. The Unraveling Threads. The morning sun bathed Thornfield Grange in a gentle light, as if attempting to cleanse the estate of the darkness that had lingered since Victor Crane's murder. The guests, though no longer suspects, remained subdued, their interactions marked by a quiet unease as they prepared to depart. Hercule Poirot, however, had not yet left. He stood in the library, the scene of the crime, his eyes tracing the now familiar contours of the room, the desk with its faint scratch, the window with its smudge of earth, the spot where the rose petal had been found. Miss Jane Marple joined him, her shawl neatly folded over her arm, her expression one of quiet contemplation. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice soft, "you have solved the mystery. Yet I sense you are not entirely at ease. Is there a thread still loose in your mind?" Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing at his lips. "You are perceptive, mademoiselle. The case is closed. Dr. Hawthorne is in custody and the evidence is clear, yet there is a disquiet in the mind of Hercule Poirot. The notes, the glove, the laudanum, they fit. But there is a rhythm to this crime that feels incomplete." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes twinkling. "In St. Mary's Mead, I have often found that a solved puzzle may hide a smaller one within it. Perhaps there is something we have overlooked, a detail that seems trivial but speaks loudly." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Précisément. Let us revisit the clues, not as evidence of Hawthorne's guilt, but as pieces of a larger tapestry. The second note, given to Mademoiselle Lyle, warned Sir Reginald to beware the shadow of greed. Why two notes, when one would suffice? And the laudanum, why purchase it so openly when secrecy was paramount? They were interrupted by Inspector Davies, who entered with a look of urgency. "Monsieur Poirot, Miss Marple, I've just received word from the village chemist. He recalls Dr. Hawthorne purchasing the laudanum, but he also mentioned seeing Miss Lyle in the shop that day, inquiring about sedatives. She didn't buy anything, but it's odd she didn't mention it." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Most interesting, Inspector. Mademoiselle Lyle has been reticent about more than one matter. Let us speak with her." They found Miss Beatrice Lyle in the morning room, packing her belongings into a small valise. Her spectacles slipped down her nose as she looked up, startled by their arrival. "Monsieur Poirot, Miss Marple," she said, her voice tight. "I was just preparing to leave. Is there something more?" Poirot's tone was gentle but probing. "Mademoiselle, the chemist in the village recalls you inquiring about sedatives 2 days before the murder. Yet you did not mention this. Why?" Miss Lyle's hands froze on her valise, her cheeks paling. I was concerned for Sir Reginald. He's been under strain, with the will and all. I thought a mild sedative might help, but I decided against it. It was nothing." Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. "And yet, mademoiselle, you also failed to mention the note from Mr. Crane until pressed. You were in the library at 8:40, near the time of the murder. Tell me, what else did you see or do?" Miss Lyle's composure cracked, her hands trembling. "I didn't kill him, but I saw something that night. When I went to fetch my pen, I saw Dr. Hawthorne in the garden near the library window. He was pacing, looking agitated. I thought he was just back from the village, but now I wonder." Miss Marple's voice was soft. "And you kept this to yourself, my dear? In my village, silence often protects the wrong person." Miss Lyle's eyes filled with tears. I was afraid. Dr. Hawthorne was kind to me, and I didn't want to believe he could do such a thing. But after Clara mentioned the heir, I realized he might have had a motive. Poirot nodded, his mind racing. "Your silence, mademoiselle, nearly obscured the truth. But it confirms what Poirot suspected. Dr. Hawthorne's actions were not solitary. The second note, I believe, was not written by Crane but by another, someone who knew of the heir and wished to warn Sir Reginald indirectly." He turned to Davies. "Inspector, we must search Miss Lyle's belongings. If she has kept one secret, there may be others." A brief search revealed a small, locked diary in Miss Lyle's valise. At Poirot's insistence, she opened it, revealing a single entry dated the night of the murder. "Crane knows too much. If he tells, it will ruin everything. I must act." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Mademoiselle, this suggests you had a role in this tragedy. Explain." Miss Lyle sobbed, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean murder. I wrote that after Crane gave me the note. I was afraid for Sir Reginald, for the estate. I thought I could convince Crane to stay silent, but when I returned to the library, he was already dead." Poirot's expression softened, but his tone remained firm. "Your fear, mademoiselle, made you an unwitting accomplice. You did not strike the blow, but your silence allowed the killer to act." Miss Marple spoke gently. "Fear, Monsieur Poirot, is a powerful force. It clouds judgment, as it did for Miss Lydia in my village, who hid a truth and caused much pain." Poirot nodded. "The threads are unraveling, mademoiselle. Dr. Hawthorne acted alone in the murder, but Miss Lyle's silence protected him. The second note, I suspect, was her attempt to warn Sir Reginald without betraying her loyalty." As Miss Lyle was led away for further questioning, Poirot turned to Miss Marple. "The case is complete, yet the human heart remains a mystery. Loyalty, fear, greed, they weave a complex web." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "And yet, Monsieur Poirot, it is in understanding that web that we find truth." The sun climbed higher, casting light on the secrets of Thornfield Grange, but Poirot knew that some shadows would linger, a testament to the fragility of human motives. Chapter 13: The Hidden Truths. The late morning light filtered through the tall windows of Thornfield Grange, casting intricate patterns on the polished floors, as if the house itself were trying to reveal its final secrets. The atmosphere, though lighter with Dr. Philip Hawthorne's confession and Miss Beatrice Lyle's reluctant disclosures, still held a trace of unease. Hercule Poirot stood in the morning room, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes scanning the garden where the rose petal had betrayed the murderer's path. Miss Jane Marple sat nearby, her knitting needles moving with a steady rhythm, her expression one of quiet vigilance. Inspector Davies, his notebook now a chronicle of the case's twists, lingered by the door, awaiting Poirot's next insight. Poirot turned to Miss Marple, his voice low but deliberate. "Mademoiselle, the case is resolved, yet there is a shadow that lingers. Miss Lyle's diary and her silence suggest a deeper involvement, not in the murder itself, but in the web of motives that surrounded it. I suspect there is one final truth to uncover, one that ties the loose threads together." Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes twinkling with understanding. "In St. Mary's Mead, I have found that the smallest secrets, kept out of loyalty or fear, often hold the key to the whole story. Miss Lyle's diary entry, 'I must act,' suggests she knew more than she admitted. Perhaps she was protecting someone else." Poirot nodded, his mustache twitching. "Précisément. Let us speak with Mademoiselle Lyle once more. Her fear, it is not only for herself, I think." They found Miss Lyle in her room, seated by a small writing desk, her face pale and drawn. Her spectacles rested on the table, and her hands were folded tightly in her lap, as though bracing for another blow. She looked up as Poirot and Miss Marple entered, her eyes wary. "Monsieur Poirot, Miss Marple," she said softly, "have I not told you everything? I swear I didn't harm Mr. Crane." Poirot's smile was gentle but probing. "Mademoiselle, I believe you did not strike the fatal blow, but your diary speaks of action, of a fear that Crane's knowledge would ruin everything. What precisely did you fear, and for whom?" Miss Lyle's lips trembled, and she hesitated, her gaze dropping to her hands. After a long moment she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was for Clara. I I've known for years that she was not Sir Reginald's true niece. She was adopted, just as Dr. Hawthorne was, but Sir Reginald kept it secret to protect her inheritance. Mr. Crane discovered the truth and was pressing Sir Reginald to reveal it. I feared if Clara knew, it would break her heart and her future." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And this secret, you kept it even after Crane's death? Why?" Miss Lyle's voice broke. "I love Clara like a sister. She's so kind, so full of life. If the truth came out, Sir Reginald might disinherit her, and she'd be left with nothing. I wrote that note, the second one, to warn him without betraying Clara's secret. I thought I could stop Crane from telling, but I was too late." Miss Marple's voice was soft, tinged with compassion. "My dear, in my village, I've seen how loyalty can lead us astray. You meant to protect Clara, but your silence nearly shielded a murderer." Poirot nodded, his mind arranging the final pieces. "The second note, then, was your creation, mademoiselle, not Crane's. You placed it in his hand to mislead, hoping to protect Mademoiselle Clara's place in the will, but in doing so, you obscured Dr. Hawthorne's motive, his own claim as the true heir." Miss Lyle nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I didn't know about Dr. Hawthorne's birthright until you revealed it. I thought I was saving Clara from ruin." Poirot turned to Davies. "Inspector, this confirms the motive. Dr. Hawthorne killed Crane to protect his claim, but Miss Lyle's actions, born of loyalty, muddied the waters. There is no further crime here, only a heart misguided by devotion." Davies scribbled a note, his expression one of relief. "So Miss Lyle isn't to be charged?" Poirot shook his head. "Her silence was unwise but not criminal. Let her bear the weight of her conscience." As they left Miss Lyle to her tears, Poirot and Miss Marple walked to the garden, where the roses stood in silent witness to the drama. Poirot's gaze lingered on a bush, its petals matching the one found in the library. "The rose petal," he said. "It was not only Hawthorne's mistake, but a symbol of this house's secrets. Beautiful, yet easily crushed." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "In St. Mary's Mead, a garden often tells more than its owner intends. Clara's handkerchief, the petal, Miss Lyle's note, all were rooted here, in love and fear." Poirot inclined his head. "You see the human heart, mademoiselle, as clearly as I see the logic of the crime. Together, we have uncovered not only a murderer, but the truth that drove him." The garden was quiet, the sun climbing higher, but within Thornfield Grange, the echoes of hidden truths lingered, a reminder that even the most carefully guarded secrets could not withstand the scrutiny of Hercule Poirot and Jane Marple. Chapter 14. The Final Pieces. The afternoon light cast a golden hue over Thornfield Grange, softening the stark lines of the estate and lending an air of calm to the turmoil that had gripped it for days. The guests, now free to leave, were packing their belongings, their movements slow and reflective, as if the weight of the revealed truths still lingered. Hercule Poirot stood in the hall, his polished cane in hand, his eyes scanning the space where the mysterious glove had been found, a clue that had played its part in unraveling the mystery. Miss Jane Marple joined him, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, her expression one of quiet satisfaction tempered by a trace of melancholy. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice gentle, "the case is solved, the murderer confessed, and Miss Lyle's secrets laid bare. Yet I sense you are still turning the puzzle in your mind. Is there a final piece that eludes you?" Poirot's mustache twitched, his green-gray eyes gleaming with a mixture of resolve and curiosity. "Mademoiselle, you are as perceptive as ever. The murder of Victor Crane is resolved, Dr. Hawthorne's motive clear, and Miss Lyle's silence explained. Yet there is one small detail, the glove in the hall, that nags at the little gray cells of Hercule Poirot. It was too deliberate, too perfectly placed. I wonder if it served a purpose beyond distraction." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "In St. Mary's Mead, I have learned that objects out of place often carry a message, whether intended or not. The glove, perhaps, was not just a red herring, but a sign of another hand at work." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. "Précisément. Let us examine this glove once more, for it may tell us something of the final act in this drama." They moved to the evidence table, where Inspector Davies had laid out the collected items: the blood-stained handkerchief, the laudanum receipt, the rose petal, and the black leather glove. Poirot lifted the glove, turning it over in his hands. Its fine craftsmanship suggested expense, and a faint monogram, barely visible, caught his eye. "E.W. E.W.," Poirot murmured. "Major Ernest Whitlock, perhaps? Yet he denied ownership, and the glove is too small for his hands." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "Unless it was not meant to be worn but to be found." Davies, who had joined them, frowned. "You think someone planted it to point at the Major?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Or to point away from another. Let us speak with Major Whitlock. His bluster, it hides more than he admits." They found Major Whitlock in the conservatory, polishing his pocket watch with a cloth, his movements brisk, but his eyes wary. "Monsieur Poirot, Miss Marple," he greeted, his voice gruff. "I'm ready to leave this blasted place. What more do you want?" Poirot held up the glove. "This, Major, bears the initials E.W., yet you claim it is not yours. Can you explain?" Whitlock's face reddened, his mustache bristling. "I told you, it's not mine. I don't wear fancy gloves like that. Someone's playing a trick, trying to pin something on me." Miss Marple's voice was soft but pointed. "In my village, Major, a man's bluster often covers a truth he'd rather not face. Did you know more about Mr. Crane's concerns than you let on?" Whitlock's hand stilled, and after a long moment he sighed, his shoulders slumping. "All right, I'll tell you. Crane came to me a week ago. Said he'd found something odd about the estate's finances. Discrepancies, he called them. He thought someone was siphoning funds, maybe even Sir Reginald himself. I told him to keep quiet, that it wasn't his place to stir up trouble, but I swear I didn't kill him." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And the glove, Major? How did it come to bear your initials?" Whitlock hesitated. It was a gift, years ago, from my late wife, Eleanor. I kept it in my room, but I haven't worn it in ages. Someone must have taken it, left it in the hall to make me look guilty." Poirot nodded, his mind arranging the final pieces. "The glove, then, was a final act of misdirection, perhaps by Dr. Hawthorne to cast suspicion elsewhere, but your silence, Major, about the financial discrepancies. It protected the guilty and muddied the waters." Miss Marple spoke gently. "In St. Mary's Mead, I've seen how fear of scandal can silence even the bravest. You meant to protect the household, Major, but truth has a way of surfacing." Poirot turned to Davies. "Inspector, The glove confirms Dr. Hawthorne's cunning. He used every tool at his disposal: Clara's handkerchief, Miss Lyle's loyalty, the Major's glove, to obscure his crime. But the truth, it cannot be hidden from Hercule Poirot. Davies nodded, his expression one of admiration. You've tied it all up, sir. The case is airtight now.
As they left the conservatory, Poirot paused, his gaze lingering on the garden. The final pieces, mademoiselle, are always the most satisfying. The glove was not just a clue, but a mirror, reflecting the desperation of a man who thought he could outwit fate. Miss Marple smiled faintly. And yet, Monsieur Poirot, it is the human heart that writes the story, with all its flaws and fears. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across Thornfield Grange, but the final truths had been uncovered, leaving only the echoes of a crime that had shaken the estate to its core.
Chapter 15. The Farewell. The final day at Thornfield Grange dawned with a serene clarity, the autumn sun bathing the estate in a golden glow that seemed to promise renewal. The oppressive weight of suspicion had lifted, replaced by a quiet acceptance as the guests prepared to leave, their lives forever altered by the events of the past days. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand hall, his suitcase packed, his polished cane in hand, ready to return to London. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl neatly folded, stood beside him, her eyes reflecting a gentle satisfaction. Inspector Davies, his duties nearly complete, joined them, his face a mixture of relief and gratitude. Monsieur Poirot, Miss Marple, Davies said, tipping his hat, I can't thank you enough. This case would have stumped us without your insight. Dr. Hawthorne's in custody, and Miss Lyle's been cautioned, though she'll face no charges. The truth's out, thanks to you. Poirot inclined his head, his mustache twitching with a faint smile. Inspector, it is the order and method of Hercule Poirot that bring clarity to chaos. But I confess, the assistance of Mademoiselle Marple was invaluable. Her understanding of the human heart complements the logic of the little gray cells. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. You are too kind, Monsieur Poirot. In St. Mary's Mead, I have learned that the smallest details, a petal, a glove, a glance, reveal the truths that logic alone cannot uncover. We make a fine pair, I think. Poirot bowed slightly. Indeed, mademoiselle. Now, let us take our leave of this house, which has seen too much sorrow. The remaining guests gathered in the hall to bid farewell. Sir Reginald Ashby, his stern demeanor softened by the ordeal, approached Poirot. Monsieur Poirot, I misjudged you. Your skill has saved my family from further ruin. I shall revise my will with care, ensuring Clara's future is secure despite her unconventional origins. Clara, standing beside him, her auburn curls catching the light, smiled through tear-filled eyes. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot, Miss Marple. I was so afraid, but you've given me hope again. Major Whitlock, his bluster subdued, offered a gruff nod. Damn fine work, Poirot. Never thought I'd be tangled in a mess like this, but you sorted it out. Mrs. Lavinia Gray, her sharp wit tempered, inclined her head. You've a keen mind, Monsieur Poirot. I shall not forget this, nor the lesson that secrets, however well kept, have a way of surfacing. Miss Beatrice Lyle, her spectacles polished and her demeanor chastened, spoke softly. I'm sorry for my silence. I thought I was protecting Clara, but I see now how it complicated everything. Thank you for your mercy. Poirot's gaze was kind but firm. Mademoiselle, the truth is a stern teacher, but it is also a liberator. Learn from it and live with courage. As the guests dispersed, Poirot and Miss Marple stepped outside, where the garden stretched before them, the roses now free of their secrets. Poirot paused, his eyes lingering on the bush where the fateful petal had fallen. This case, mademoiselle, was a tapestry of human failings, greed, fear, loyalty, deception. Dr. Hawthorne sought his birthright. Miss Lyle sought to protect. Major Whitlock sought to avoid scandal. Yet each, in their way, contributed to the tragedy. Miss Marple nodded, her voice soft. In my village, I've seen how the heart's desires, however noble, can lead us astray. But I believe, Monsieur Poirot, that truth, though painful, brings healing. Poirot's smile was genuine. You speak with wisdom, mademoiselle. The world is full of such puzzles, but with minds like ours, no secret can remain hidden. They walked to the gate, where a car awaited to take Poirot to the station. Miss Marple extended her hand. Until we meet again, Monsieur Poirot, perhaps in St. Mary's Mead, over tea and roses. Poirot took her hand, bowing gallantly. Adieu, Mademoiselle Marple. It would be an honor. As the car pulled away, Thornfield Grange receded into the distance, its ivy-clad walls standing as a silent witness to the drama that had unfolded. Miss Marple turned toward the village, her steps light despite her years, ready to return to her quiet life, until the next mystery called her name.